Welcome to the second story from the world of New Dawn, the Haist. Over the coming weeks, we will delve into the great deeds and evil acts committed by nobility and common sellswords in both nautical adventure and desperate bids for survival in a hostile world. Join us in a realm recovering from a time of darkness and strife known as the Long Night. Once great empires were reduced to feudal kingdoms and vast tracts of deadly territory. These are the tales of the brave and daring of this world. These are stories of shadow and steel. The Haist. Part 2.
The man's head tilted to the side slightly as he considered his answer. What came out of his mouth sounded like Central, a language she knew, but the arrangement of the words took her a moment to comprehend.
Me partner be a bit sick in the head, yeah? So I keep him straight as a steerin' pin what comes to dealing with other folk. If not me meddlin' with his aims, he'd be dead back in the when and where I'd found him. Good lad deep down though. By the by, I'm Taskell Macduff. Can get into any purse and be out again with wage enough to make em cry.
Macduff.
Anna rolled the strange name about as she tested it. Both Pablo and Macduff replied.
Taskell.
Her eyes narrowed at the pair, a rogue with a voice and blade paired with a thief with a very unique-looking thief. Not nearly her first choice in companions. But her opportunity for team selection had ended. She relented.
Fine, Pablo, Taskell. This is Axel, and I'm Erna Shorse, Ritter for hire.
She waited for her companions to have her full attention before she continued in a hushed tone.
We are going to rob a caravan rolling out of the Holy City headed for Nevarez. We will hit it tomorrow at dusk at a crossroads some 20 miles from here, so our preparations must be short. Let's get to work, gentlemen, as there is much of it to do before we set out. Later on in the day,
the sun was half hidden by the Mara del Moro hills. Its aspect wavered in the sunset heat of central Sandoval as it glowed in its ruddy yellow descent behind the expansive scrubland hills. The road was only partially graced with its fading light, as the ripple of the terrain created many shadows in which ne'do-wells could hide. And this evening there were at least 4 of them waiting for the caravan about to amble through.
4 outriders all in full battle rattle.
Axel whispered down to Una and Pablo from his well-hidden perch atop one of the hills near the road. 2 minutes till the forward riders, half a minute more after for the target.
How many on the caravan?
Una asked.
It's a small oarsman. Some 20 working the gears below decks, another 5 on deck, none in the crow's nest.
Axel offered back. Caravans were created as a solution to the many perils one could find when traveling the long distances between civilized places on land. Too many lone riders and wagons had gone missing to monster attacks and mysterious circumstances over the decades, so a kind of landship was invented. They came in many shapes and sizes, but generally adhered to a few basic mores. They were never wider than a common roadway. They were powered by either a well-protected team of beasts within its lower extremities or, as in this case, a team of oarsmen who manipulated a series of large gears that propelled the heavy wheels of the vehicle forward. What was coming down the road was a portable fortification of wood with steel bracing. The people guarding it were fanatics who would kill anyone who made an attempt at their cargo without hesitation. To any sane 4 people it was an insurmountable obstacle. To Una and her crew it was a juicy prize for the taking.
That would be my cue. Adios, boss, I have a performance to attend.
Pablo tipped his hat as he left his comrades with a bundle of rope under his arm and a keg over his shoulder. He would be in the most danger for the longest time if things went well. He'd be a dead man in less than a minute if they didn't. Pablo slipped away and out into the middle of the roadway, placed the barrel down firmly in the center, and limbered up for his imminent performance. His chosen audience were already noting his sudden appearance as they rode toward him. 2 riders, each with a lance in one hand and a pistol in the other, guided their war horses with knees as they bore down on him.
Clear the road in the name of the church.
One shouted as the riders stopped just before running Pablo down. Their charge was some 200 paces back and coming on steadily. Pablo bowed for them.
I am Pablo the Pious and have been granted gifts by the Almighty which I would share with you and your friends this evening.
His voice rang out over the hills, so that everyone in the vicinity could hear him.
Behold, I will set that bush atop that hill alight with but the snap of my fingers.
Pablo announced, snapped his fingers, and watched as the two riders were suddenly distracted by a loud pop, and a wild brush atop a roadside hill erupted in flame.
Sorcerer! Be gone with your tricks, or they will be your last.
One of them shouted.
TSK? TSK? TSK.
Pablo waved a discerning finger at the pair.
I am no fuego phoenix. God has given me powers over the beasts of the land as well.
He spread his arms wide before slowly lowering them. The two steeds ejected their riders as they lowered themselves to the road and dozed off. One of the two outriders landed on their feet and aimed his pistol at Pablo, pulling its hammer back with finality.
Tricks! You have meddled in important church business. I judge you worthy of death.
Pablo quickly formed his fingers into the shape of a gun and pointed back at the pistol that threatened his life.
Who needs pistols when the Almighty smites my foes?
A shot rang out and the guard's pistol spun wildly from his hand to land on the roadway. He clutched his pained digits as he dropped his spear. The man's partner charged Pablo with her spear, aiming to impale him on it with a savage blow. Pablo's other hand formed a new pistol and he whispered the word, bang. Another shot came, the woman's spear pulverized halfway down its shaft, but she kept coming for him. Her lunge struck out at Pablo, who ducked it as he drew his fencing blade, and slapped her in the back with the flat as her momentum carried her by him. The pistolless outrider pulled and blew a whistle from his vest. The other two distant outriders immediately broke into a charge to reinforce their compatriots. Pablo was fast on the man with a flash of steel and cut the whistle from his mouth, leaving a painful gash across the man's cheek as he did so. Just as the whistle landed in his palm, Pablo ducked another attempt from the lady outrider who came at him from behind. The sudden movement had her blow connect with the face of her companion, who was knocked clean from his feet to land hard on the roadway. Pablo scolded the warrior woman as he lined up his retaliation.
God will even forgive me for this.
He feigned a swing at her with his blade which forced her to open her guard to his real, and quite unorthodox assault. He put all of his weight and momentum into a single kick up into her crotch. It was hard enough to lift her from the ground before setting her down again with no fight remaining. She fell to the ground grabbing at the intensely painful results of the attack. Pablo made the sign of the faith as he turned to deal with the soon arriving outriders while whispering to himself.
At least I hope he will forgive me.
Striking anyone in the Nethers was seen as poor conduct, striking a woman in general was seen as dastardly, ending a fight by testing the fortitude of a woman's Nethers with your boot was probably grounds for some sort of damnation. He promised himself sometime later to pray for his sins, but at the moment there was more work to be done. Axel's rifle was quite the marvel of craftsmanship. Even with all of its marvelous accuracy and well-engineered mechanisms, its masterful user was having a hard time keeping up with Pablo's antics. Axel's eye went wide when he saw what the sandy madman had planned next for him. He was aiming his finger guns at both oncoming outriders bearing down on him. Axel's hand tore into his advanced powder kit and pulled a specialized round and wad combination. With a single swift motion he had his weapon loaded with it, but it was only a single shot. If he failed to hit both of them now, he would not have time to prevent one of them from skewering Pablo on the end of their lance. He forsake his hiding spot to stand tall with the sun at his back. He needed every advantage for his next shot. The riders were coming on hard, they were a flank of each other, so lining up a shot was out of the question. Neither guard wore much in the way of metal armor, but both had steel shoulder pauldrons. Axel smiled. Axel's mind raced as he focused solely on the shoulder of the rider on the left. His held breath eased out of him as his whole body prepared for the shot. He aimed just off target, up and to the left just a bit. He sighted and squeezed the trigger. His rifle blasted the wadding out to join the rest of its spent companions around him. He kept his eye on the target for the eternity of a half-second it took for the round to travel the distance, collide with the rider's shoulder pauldron, and ricochet across to their partner. Both riders fell from their horses mere yards from either side of Pablo, their steeds racing past with uncontrolled momentum. By way of response, Pablo blew the imaginary smoke from both of his finger guns before holstering them at his waist. Even Axel had to smile. It was a stupid ploy, but it had worked. After the brief personal reverie, Axel knelt again and loaded his rifle with one of his signaling wads. Aiming at the sky, he fired again, allowing the fiercely glowing payload to rocket up and toward the oncoming caravan. Having given the signal, his part in the event had ended. He gathered his things, slid quietly down the slope and stalked away among the shadows. Taskill saw the tiny red streak of fire shoot overhead and jumped up from his hiding place behind the crest of his hill. He half ran, half tumbled down it and onto the road, holding the end of his rope as he went. His trajectory took him across the road with enough momentum to get him several feet up a far slope before he started his mad scramble up to its top. Once there, and nearly at the end of his rope, he rounded the stake he had planted an hour earlier and tied a quick knot. An instant later, his deft hands were pulling the rope taut so that it became an elevated tightrope. Once he tested the line to his satisfaction, he tumbled painfully head over heels back down the slope and scrambled to the middle of the roadway just in time for the prow of the caravan to pass over him. If he were any thicker, the bulk of the thing would have caught and dragged him, but as small as he was, he just managed to squeeze under as it rolled overhead. Looking up into the chaotic assembly of gears contained within the hull of the vehicle, he plotted his next move. A sharp pain shot through his side as a rock tied to the end of another rope collided with him. This was Pablo's rope, swung under the caravan to get to him. Now that he was in position, that meant that Pablo had readied the surprise and was already on his way out of the road. Taskill grabbed the rope and started making his way up into the deadly gearworks of the vehicle, trailing the cord behind him as he went to snag on anything he could get it into. He had to race through the tight space before the caravan crushed the keg and unleashed the surprise, lest the plan go awry. Anna, now in her full plate armor and helm, swung hand over hand across the set rope between the hills. The caravan was already passing beneath her as she went, so she kept a dangerous pace, nearly slipping twice as she went. Several crew on deck had already noticed her and took pot shots at her as she progressed. Only one struck home, numbing her right leg as it struck and dented armor plate. The rush from combat was so exhilarating that she barely paid it any mind. She had a caravan to board and people to fight, and no rifle round was going to stop her from getting there. She arrived amidships just as Pablo's barrel came racing down the road to impact the bow of the caravan directly below her. Its velocity was increased by the many gears Taskill had wound it through as they gathered up the rope it was attached to. She braced herself as the mixture of gunpowder and alchemical agents within exploded. Shards of debris showered her, and she felt the pain of dozens of tiny lacerations and punctures in her armor. The true effect was the sudden explosion of concealing smoke that shot out to engulf the entire area. Anna dropped the 10 or so feet to land on the prow, having to roll into a standing position due to her ailing leg. Once planted, she was immediately in action, her Zweihander free of its back loops and hunting for prey. The cold steel of her weapon went through the first man easily, then came out of his side to cleave the next in two at the waist. The rest came at her in the choking smoke, and she dealt with them as well, each with a single swing of her great weapon. As she approached amidships, her balance was sorely tested as Taskill's work paid off. The caravan first lurched, then shuddered to starboard, knocking the remaining deck crew down or forcing them to grab nearby lines. Their complaints told her where they were, and so she quickly hunted them each down. There had been 10 crew. She would remember to scold Axel about his mathematics once the job was done. Once amidships, she stabbed her weapon between the seams of a locked trapdoor and pried it open with a dual helping of muscle-bound force and proper leverage. She dropped down the hatch and into the darkness of the oaring deck. The taskmaster was a single swipe to behead, leaving the clerical oarsman to review her in her blood-spattered intensity.
God is not with you today. Leave now and live. Stand and die.
Enna howled. The oarsmen took only a moment to decide. They opted to push past her and up the ladder she had ignored on her descent. She watched them leap from the deck through the portholes lining the gallery as she marched across it to reach the room at the far end, and her prize. She nearly murdered Taskill as he popped up through an unseen hatch in the floor within reach of the door to the treasury. The blade was close enough that, when he finally paid it any mind, he kissed it before brushing it away.
Be a dreadful shame to have one less head, I'd say. Let's not and say we didn't then.
He rambled as he took position next to her while brushing himself off from the detritus he had been covered in when the keg erupted beneath him to flood the gear works. Without offering reply, she kicked the door to the treasury in with all of her weight. It sundered messily and listed aside enough to allow entry, and she was through with the remaining momentum the blow had given her. A thin blade slid through her helmet visor and across the bridge of her nose as she entered. Blinded by the pain, she chose to roll forward and into the attack in an attempt to gain distance as well as trap the weapon, if not in ideal circumstances. The maneuver blinded her as her own blood shot up into her face and eyes, having no place else to go. A second later she heard a gunshot and a terrible cold pain shot up from her hip to engulf her. The point-blank pistol shot had stunned her to near unconsciousness and had her roll forward onto the deck face first. Her senses dulled for a moment as she struggled to regain control of her functions. She could hear the distant sounds of Taskill assaulting whomever had attacked her. There was only one attacker, her mind told her through the haze of pain and cold and dizziness. Taskill can handle them until I regain my footing.
I will regain my footing,
she repeated, over and over again in a makeshift mantra that she used to cleave her way back to clarity. She took a knee and unstrapped her helm, tossing it aside so that she could wipe away the blood invading her vision. Once done and her vision had partially returned, she caught sight of Taskill from behind, a blade protruding through a wound in his side, pummeling an inquisitor in his red robes and black combat gear. The assailed man was beating Taskill about the head and shoulders with the butt of his spent pistol, as they were pressed so close no other weapon or type of attack was available. He managed to finally stun the savage in with a blow to the temple and kicked the smaller man across the small room and into several crates. Sensing his opening, the Inquisitor drew another pistol from among his six brace and aimed a shot at Taskill. At this range he could neither miss nor could his target survive. Anna grabbed her sword with both hands and swung it upward with all her remaining might. The pistol and several of the Inquisitor's digits spun away in a bloody spray, though the Zweihander lodged itself several inches into the roof wood. While the Inquisitor was still reeling, Taskill launched himself from his crates, the sword that had impaled him in hand. He pounced on the red-clad man like a maddened badger, running him through with his own weapon. Taskill removed the sword from the dying Inquisitor and stabbed him again and again with it, speaking in his strange tongue as he did so, as if scolding the man incessantly.
It's over, Taskill. Stop your savagery,
Anna shouted in an attempt to break Taskill from whatever madness had taken him. Taskill did cease, though there was a terrible madness still gleaming in his eyes.
Man, what killed my sister? Deserves a worse death, don't you think?
Anna was shocked.
That man killed your sister.
Taskill dropped the bloody blade and shrugged.
Some man did. Why not him then?
You have issues. Deep and troubling issues.
Anna scolded until the caravan jolted from its relatively gentle impact with a roadside hill. She refocused.
Let's keep on task. Find the coffer box.
Taskill offered a wry smile and a bob of his head to direct her attention to a large box she had used to brace herself. She looked down at it and spied its ornate surface, as well as the large ank emblazoned across the entirety of its top. It was a steel affair and had one of the most complex locks in all the world, maintaining the security of its lid.